Alrighty, everyone. So here we are about to draw the reproductive reflexes on the feet, as well as the hands, face, and ears. There is going to be a little bit of discrepancy, so we will talk about that as we go. Also important to understand that these exact same pictures are in the lesson, so you can print them out and draw with me should you like. I'm just going to be using my Crayola markers. Crayola does not give me a kickback for that. I wish they did. And what I want you to understand is that, as far as discrepancy goes, the first thing to note is that every chart is going to be different. The reproductive reflexes are very polarized in reflexology because there are a lot of textbooks, especially in the body work world, the massage worlds, that talk about reflexology as not being appropriate for pregnancy and the pregnancy process. So some of those reflexes are, in some I've seen totally omitted, but also in very unique places, as well as understanding, traditional Chinese medicine and kind of more anatomical reflexology are very, very different. So if you're thinking about reproduction from a traditional Chinese medicine standpoint, and that is the school that you've been trained in, the reflexes might look different because their theories are different, their mapping is different. And then if you're thinking about anatomically, we're going to be focused on that side of the equation today. So just as preface, and then we'll talk about the rest as we go. So let's start with the ovary reflex and the testy reflex. So when we think of gender differentials between men and women and mapping the reflexes are in the same place. But, obviously men don't have ovaries, women don't have testes, but the reflex is the same for both. So ovaries and testes, what you want to look for is you want to look at the corner of the Achilles tendon attachment and then the lateral malleoli, that ankle bone. Halfway between the two is the ovarian reflex and the testy reflex. Okay, really simple. This is a point that I found to be very accurate, to the point where when clients have undergone IVF, I know which side has more eggs. Sometimes I can even palpate the egg count, which don't think that makes me a good reflexologist. I'm just creepy accurate that way. But, not something that I would want spread around either. So just, it's a very accurate reflex. We'll just leave it at that. Okay. Now, let's talk about the fallopian tubes vas deferens. So those are located on the dorsal ankle. Remember that the reflexes are through and through. So if you wanted to think of horizontal zone 4 on the plantar surface as having those same reflexes, totally. But for my purposes, the way that I've found to be accurate, especially for assessment, the dorsal ankle is the fallopian tube vas deferens reflex. So we need two pictures to demonstrate that. We're going to take a line straight from the ovarian reflex, ovary testy reflex, and we're going to draw it over the dorsal ankle, just like that. See how I did that there? So since I can't show you on a picture the dorsal medial view at the same time, I just wanted to use those two pictures, and then we'll draw it all together up top. Okay? Now, third reflex to be aware of with the reproductive system is going to be the uterus reflex. So the uterus reflex is located on the medial malleoli. It's a crescent-shaped reflex on the medial malleoli, or the inner ankle bone. So that uterus reflex, this area I actually do not work during my routine. And what I mean by that is that I don't go out of my way to stimulate this reflex. One, because reflexology is not push button fix issue, so it's not like you need to press the uterine reflex in order to affect the uterus. This is also the prostate reflex, by the way, for on the male side. So men with prostate issues, this is the reflex that will often become swollen and painful. They'll also have shooting referral sensations into this area, which they don't realize is connected, but also very funny from a reflexology perspective. But I do not touch this area because it is tender, so tender. Most people will find this area to be very, very tender. I'm sure that there are a couple nerves running through here. hitting this area does not feel good. It is not nice, and therefore I omit it from my routine and allow the body to kind of send the impulses into the reproductive space on its own without my help. And my sessions are amazing. So that's just FYI. I don't need to press this in order to stimulate the uterus and uterus prostate. So that's just kind of caveat with that. Okay. Now let's take a look at this top image. So we'll start by just kind of putting it all together. The medial aspect is that uterus prostate. Crescent shape. Then we'll go to the fallopian tubes, vas deferens. And then unfortunately we can't really see the medial aspect, but just for giggles, we'll kind of put it on the other side. Okay. And those are the reproductive reflexes. Now, the breast area is chest lungs, so that is ball of the foot territory. Don't really need to show you that one. It's just the entire ball of the foot. It's not like there is a direct breast reflex because the breasts take up the entire chest space. So it's the entire ball of the foot, basically, is how we would map that. Okay. Now, let's see. And then there is no direct reflex for like the vagina and the penis. So just uterus, prostate, fallopian tube, vas deferens, ovaries, testes. Anyway, okay. So now let's go to the hand. So the hand, we also have the dorsal view. I just wanted to really zoom in on this because it gets a little bit tricky. Hands are tricky to map because when you see them, sometimes they're in anatomical position, sometimes they're not. But what you need to remember is that the thumb represents the big toe. So if this was the big toe, in foot reflexology, this is the midline of the body. And then this would represent the little toe, or the lateral / outside the body. Okay, so just letting you know, because if your hands are turned like this is like big toes, little toes, like that is the way that it should be. But some maps have the hands palmar surface like this. So even though the thumbs are now outside and the little fingers are now inside, the hands are mapped differently. So just kind of letting you know, this is the way that we're going to look at it. Midline, outside. Okay. So, don't need my yellow. I'm getting all inked up. Goodness. Okay. Let's talk about ovaries, testes. So ovaries, testes are lateral. So just like they're on the lateral side of the ankle in the foot, they're on the lateral side of the hand. Now their location, I should probably go back and do the guidelines for you guys. We'll do that in a second. But the location of the ovary testes reflex is on that lateral side, but the wrist represents the ankle. So we are going to treat the ankle like the wrist and do lateral for ovaries, testes. And then fallopian tubes, vas deferens across the dorsal, just like with the dorsal ankle. And then uterus, prostate, midline. If you wanted, you could make it crescent shape. Okay? And that's it. So again, if you wanted to think of the reflexes as through and through, so it's not like, the reflexes are only on one side, that's something that you could think about as well. But outside, ovary, testes, fallopian tube, vas deferens, and then uterus, prostate. Then if we wanted to go back and grab a marker. So we have the guidelines just for hands, and then we'll go back and do feet. The proximal head of the fifth metacarpal is our waistline guideline. And then you can't really see it well in the hands, but the deviation between the upper and lower row of carpals gives us VZ4 or HZ4, goodness, and then HZ5. Okay, so horizontal zone 4, upper row of carpals, horizontal zone 5, lower row of carpals, and that gives us our guidelines that we need to map the hands. And then just to kind of go back to the foot, we have on the lateral surface, proximal head of the fifth metatarsal, waistline guideline, and then everything behind the lateral malleolus is zone 4, and same thing here. So it's basically that Achilles tendon space. And then if we wanted to extend our waistline guideline all the way across. And we'll do the same thing over here. But we can't really see horizontal zone 5. It's all the way back there on either side. Okay, so that is how we would map just guidelines wise, just going back to the feet. Okay, now let's go to the ears. Yeah, we'll do ears first. Okay, so we have our ears. Now horizontal zone 3 with the waistline guideline is just below the Symbiconcha space and above the Cavum concha space. So above that auditory canal. And then that dip between the tragus and antitragus is our pelvic line. Okay, so we have horizontal zone 4. Now here's the difference between the feet and the hands and the face and the ears. There is no medial lateral side, right, of face and ears. It's not like we have a dorsal ankle or dorsal wrist with the ears and the face. So the reflexes are much more squished, much more congested. What we want to basically do is map in that tragal space the ovaries, testes, their tubes, and then deep in the auditory basin, that uterus prostate. And this is dangerous territory for a lot of people, because when you think of the auditory opening as like the place of chronic ear infections, that could mean both lower digestive and reproductive. So when you think of that opening in horizontal zone 4, that represents all of the openings in horizontal zone 4. Could be digestive, could be reproductive, but that auditory canal represents that deep pelvic space. Could be bladder as well. So all of that represented within that space. And when we think of the previous lesson with urinary system is also overlapping all of those structures. So what you'll see on some maps is the reflexes are kind of like one on top of the other, and it can be somewhat hard to interpret, but that's really how they appear anatomically. So it's difficult to really distinguish them, since they really suitcase on top of each other. But anyway, horizontal zone 4, deep in the auditory opening, that's all reproductive territory. And lovely face. Okay. So now let's talk about guidelines for the face. So we have our smile line, our waistline, just extending that all the way up. And then that pelvic line around the jaw. Okay. So horizontal zone 4 is where the reproductive reflexes is right in through here. Fascinating when you think about it, because if you have children or friends or family who are constantly developing acne in this area, it represents that really, really deep reproductive trauma. Okay, so here we have a little bit more of a classic interpretation of the shape of the reproductive system. Regardless, male or female, this is a very female drawing of the reproductive system with the ovaries, fallopian tubes, and uterus. But same for male. It's not like I would draw the testes down here, although technically I guess you could. It's the same stuff, same reflex. You're in the general vicinity. What I really use this for is the assessment. So when clients come in and they have dry patches, red irritated patches, even like lower lip, like cold sores, things like that, all very, very deep reproductive, deep pelvic space. So simple, but super effective when it comes to reading faces. That is where the reproductive system is located, right there in midline horizontal zone 4, just like in the actual physical body. So interesting there. Those are how to map your feet, hands, face, and ears. I hope you enjoyed this, and we will move on with the next part of our lesson.